Okay, this is John Burroughs again, and I'm going to continue with my autobiography, 7 Years to Life. And this is chapter 65, and it's called Apologize. Having never worked for a large corporation in the past for any real length of time, I was completely taken off guard at the immaturity, ruthlessness, ambition, greed, backstabbing, gossiping, and just how far certain people would go, and the principles they were willing to sacrifice for a title and more money. This does not take away from the people who achieved high levels within the company through honor and hard work. In many ways, it resembled an adult high school. The social aspect and the opportunity to forge lifetime friendships was a definite plus, but I was completely unprepared for the politics and manipulation that took place. Unfortunately, if you wanted to keep your job at any level in Pacific Bell, it was necessary to participate in these practices. I am a quick learner from the time I was in my teens, where survival sometimes required the same skills. I am convinced that there were very few people more adept at playing the manipulation game. I was not fond of it and only used these skills when absolutely necessary. Throughout my life, most of the time I threw caution to the wind and let my principles guide me, regardless of the consequences. I cherish the time I had at Pacific Bell because, unlike so many circumstances in my prior life, I accomplished many things there that made me and other people proud. It was the beginning of understanding risk and the accountability that accompanies it. I also did things that I was not proud of, but they were few and far between. The rest of this story is about a small accomplishment that was my first at the company. There were 70,000 employees with Pacific Bell when I started, and the first thing I realized that in a company of that size, I was going to need allies because I know enemies were sure to come along. In order to make true friends and allies, you have to build a reputation through your deeds and actions that made people see that you were kind and compassionate, but certainly not a pushover when it came to defending what you believed in. I had been working for the company for a few months and was a member of the union. The union at this stage of my career may have been the single most important ally I could have. The president of my local, Val A., had been recently re-elected after an arduous campaign against someone that I perceived as dramatically underqualified for the job, not to mention that he was just an instigator, regardless of which way the wind was blowing. Yet somehow, he inspired enough people by using lies and promises that I knew were impossible to keep. I had always admired Val because he was a gentleman and knew how to hold firm when the situation required it, and had an uncanny knack for negotiating. His negotiating skills were fueled by a genuine concern for good people in general, but also for the employees in his local that put their faith in his loyalty and honesty. I learned by observing him so many different ways to negotiate, and I had seen so many people on both sides of an issue walk away from the table with a mutually beneficial solution to a problem and a newfound respect for each other. I would religiously attend meetings because I knew that Val was incapable of lying, so I always received unfiltered information. Before beginning his re-election campaign, Val came and said to me two things. I know you are already a shop steward and your skills have helped many people remain employed. In fact, I cannot recall a time where we had a steward here that has put together the winning record that you have in such a short period of time. I know that in addition to your record, it is the person that you are within. Excuse me. I thanked him for the compliments and told him that my record was owed largely to what I learned from watching him in action. I had never seen him enter a meeting with company officials and act like he was the leader of the opposition. I had never heard him lie or even slightly embellish information given to the company or the people at the local, no matter how uplifting or depressing the news was. He waved me off and said, "Enough about me. I came here to ask you to be my chief steward for the short time that I have left as president if I am not reelected. If I am, you will continue to be my chief steward. On top of that, if you feel open to helping me, I desperately would love to have you running my campaign." I felt so proud that moment. In short, I became the chief steward and continued my successful streak and helped vanquish his opposition. I remember Val asking me to lunch at Original Joe's the day after I told him that I had accepted the management decision. I had met him there, and as soon as I sat down at the table and ordered a drink, "I asked you to lunch today so I can tell you that I know exactly what type of person you are. People are naturally drawn to you, and that is your ability to be fearless when you are telling someone about what happened to you and what you learned from it. Your quick wit can, figuratively, carve someone up that opposes you or does not share your opinion. The irony of the whole situation, especially when you are discussing something of great importance, your quick wit steps in and surprises everyone. Instead of using this talent of yours to embarrass somebody, you use it in a self-deprecating manner that is hilarious 95% of the time, and you achieve an agreeable solution for all concerned. Some people just don't get it, and that is their fault." We finished our lunch, and Val picked up the check. He finished his thoughts by saying, "I know that continually hearing comments about yourself can cause you to question their authenticity, so let me leave you with this. As a person that we both know and is a manager told me when the labor management issue was resolved that you deserve the majority of the credit. He said that he felt good almost all the time he was involved in the meeting where you served as my replacement. He never left the table feeling insulted or duped. You listened intently, took your part seriously, and worked diligently to be a valuable contributor. With the funny stories that you could fire off at a rapid pace, any tension remaining was now gone, and he found himself looking towards the next meeting. Val and I walked to our cars, and Val assured me that it did not make a difference which side of the table I was on, because I would always try to inspire people to do the right thing. I will see you again at another table someday, but perhaps from a different angle. I was still a chief steward when Hank informed the crew that he was being moved to another position, and the replacement would be someone named Mark W. You could actually feel the air in the room get colder when Mark W.'s name was mentioned. The guys started getting on Steve K. about our new supervisor. He was new to me, but apparently he had managed the crew at one time prior to my arrival. The guys were hard timing Steve K. because supposedly Steve was Mark's boy. It was apparently no secret that Steve coveted a management position, and Mark knew this and used it to his advantage. Mark had convinced Steve that he would help him get into management. However, Mark was replaced by Hank, and Steve's dreams of management were put on hold. But now Mark was coming back, and the rest of the crew found it impossible not to start kidding Steve, and they did it without mercy. I was completely taken off guard when the crew started in on me. I was told that Mark was essentially an a-hole and an unforgiving perfectionist. I became frightened when I was told that Mark would not tolerate the slightest flaw in the quality of any tech's workmanship. I was led to believe that my time in the crew, maybe even in Pacific Bell, would end shortly after Mark's arrival. The truth of the matter is that my diagnostic capabilities were equal to, and in many cases better than anyone in the crew. Figuring out what was wrong was not the problem at all. It was my ability to fix the problems, as I was told by the rest of the guys, would fall short of his standards. When Mark finally arrived, he immediately points Steve K. as the second, meaning that if problems were to arise when he was not available, the first person to go to would be Steve K. After a few morning meetings, listening to not only what Mark would say and how he would say it, made my fear dissipate quite rapidly. I had spent most of my life up until this point how to read people, and that taught me how to handle egomaniacs such as Mark. Manipulating these personality types such as Mark was child's play for me. It is really quite simple. In Mark's case, he considers himself an intellectual and smarter than anyone else. And Mark could not help but to fall prey to compliments, and no matter how exaggerated they were. He did not believe they were exaggerated, and he always remembered and protected the people that stroked him the most often. When he realized that I was his intellectual equal, actually I was superior, and could articulate my opinions in a profound and meaningful manner, I actually think it was his strategy to befriend me rather than alienate me. This became obvious during the time when quarterly inventory was a high priority for every field manager. It required detailed paperwork, and the report had a deadline attached to it. During this time, Steve K. was not given a workload. Mark would have Steve K. remain in the yard and assist him in taking inventory and filling out the forms that required Mark's signature. The deadline got closer, and Mark grew more irritable. The morning before the inventory report was due, Steve K. was filling in the blanks with the information that was required. Steve K. brought the finished work for Mark's signature. The entire crew was still in the office mapping out their loads when Mark completely flew off the handle at Steve K. The reason for his anger was that the blank boxes where information had to be handwritten in, Steve's writing went slightly outside of the lines. Mark started screaming at Steve, telling him that he had that the writing had to fit inside of the box and that no marks were to be outside of said box, no matter how slightly. Mark was fuming and insulting Steve in a way that was designed to humiliate him and make him feel small. I know that was the case because the entire crew shared in Steve K.'s embarrassment. Mark threw another form at Steve and told him to start over and do it correctly this time. There were many forms at Pacific Bell that needed to be filled in, and in those instances where the writing exceeded the lines was not a big deal. I could not understand Mark's anger other than his ruthless ambition to attain high levels in the company affected his behavior to the point where he was completely irrational. Steve finished his second attempt at filling in the forms. Keeping the writing within the space allotted for it was not an easy task for anyone. Steve put the second form on Mark's desk, and once again some of the pen markings barely exceeded the space provided for it. This time I found the way Mark berated Steve was unbelievable, to say the least. It was laced with profanity, and the obvious intent was to berate and belittle Steve K. in front of his peers. Aside from the fact that Mark was an unforgiving perfectionist, bearing witness to the way Mark behaved that day, it was plain for everyone to see that he took a sadistic pleasure in embarrassing Steve in that fashion. At the conclusion of his tirade, Mark said to Steve K., "Just get the hell out of here. You make me sick. Get your load. Maybe you can do that correctly." Steve stormed out of the office, obviously fuming, but to the complete disbelief of everyone that had watched Steve's humiliation take place, found that the fact that Steve remained silent and did not defend himself was not only out of character for him, but left us all bewildered. I went out to the yard where Steve K. was in the process of loading his truck with the necessary supplies for his workload, and I said to him angrily, "What the fuck does Mark have over you anyway?" Without looking at me, he replied, "I don't want to talk about it." I told him that he did not have a choice and that it was my responsibility as a chief steward to at least file a grievance on the crew's behalf, and because of the whole incident would be under tremendous scrutiny regardless of his wishes. I inquired of him by asking, "Do you really have a strong desire to be a manager?" "Yes," was his simple answer. "Well, you are going about it the wrong way. It doesn't take anything special to be a manager. I like Hank, but coming on being a manager, however, even if you owned your own company, would you make him a manager, much less even hire him? If you had the leadership and ability and ambition, I know you can attain that goal regardless of Mark's attempts to intimidate you. Stop and think about it. I think your silence in the face of that type of verbal onslaught tells him that you think all paths lead through him, and that is exactly how he wants it. Sadly, I also think as much as we all admire you, your peers were shocked and probably lost a lot of respect. I gave Steve a moment to let all of what I had just said sink in. Then I continued, "You had left me between a rock and a hard place. As a steward, I'm obligated to file a grievance on my behalf and the crew's, whether you want me to or not. This is not a professional situation that I can think of where a person has to take that kind of verbal abuse regardless of what title someone holds. There is no doubt in my mind that I could write a compelling grievance that the entire crew would sign as witnesses to the incident and file it through the proper channels, and with a matter of days, Mark would receive some sort of disciplinary action. I do not want to handle the situation this way, and I am convinced that you don't want it to go down that way either. I think you have a much better solution to the problem that could be mutually agreeable, but you're going to have to start the ball rolling. Do you want to hear it?" Steve said, "I will listen, but that is just the way Mark is." I then told Steve that forgetting about this outburst will not make the incident go away. Here's what I would do if I were in your shoes. Go back in there right now and tell him that I intend to file a grievance on behalf of the crew. Paul will have every member of the crew sign it. It will be a detailed account of your outrageous actions today. He will submit it and assures me that disciplinary action of some sort will be brought against you. It might make those in higher positions rethink your upper-level management potential. Steve, the next part is that you have to convince Mark that it was your idea. Tell him that you will never again tolerate being treated in such a manner again. You want and expect a full apology in front of the crew tomorrow morning. Then we will wipe the slate clean and start over. I think once Paul sees you swallow your pride and sincerely apologize, he will consider the matter closed. Steve, if you stand up to Mark this way, his respect for you and the crew will grow. Sometimes the decisions are a matter of right and wrong. There is no middle ground. Mark was wrong." Steve agreed and went back and calmly told Mark his options. The next morning, he apologized to Steve K. in front of the crew. I have to give Mark credit. His apology seemed to be sincere. I know that Mark and the crew became as close as a crew can get to its manager after that apology. I am proud of everybody involved, but I am most proud of myself. I knew I gave Steve the best solution, and it appeared to him that I was very confident that the plan would work. However, deep down inside, I was guessing myself and was afraid that it may backfire.